Hey, welcome to another episode on the Joel Wright 2 channel. Today's video features my dad, John Wright, as he gives a presentation to the pilots of the 78th Fighter Squadron at Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina in October of 1997. A little background on my dad: he was a career Air Force pilot. He was commissioned in 1951 through the Aviation Cadet Program, which no longer exists. So shortly after he was commissioned, got his wings, he was off to fly combat in the Korean War in the Republic F-84. And then after flying combat, he spent time in the F-84 back in the States. He got pulled into the Strategic Air Command to fly bombers, B-47s, B-58s. Got back into fighters with the F-105, flew combat in the Vietnam War in the 105, and then got pulled back into bombers, B-52s, later in his career. And he retired in 1975 as a full colonel. So why was he talking to the 78th? Well, a little background. From 1996 to 1997, I was the intelligence officer for the 78th Fighter Squadron, which at that time was equipped with the F-16. In the summer of 97, my parents came in to visit me, and I arranged to have a big tour of the squadron given to them. And as part of his visit, I asked if my dad could give a little presentation to the pilots about his combat experiences in the Korean War and the Vietnam War. That presentation went so well, my squadron commander loved it so much that he invited my dad to come back later in the year, in October of 97, when the squadron was going to have its Heritage Day, Bushmaster Heritage Day. So in October of 97, my dad came back to Shaw. He flew up in his own Beechcraft Bonanza, flew into Shaw Air Force Base, was put up in VIP quarters, and then he gave a more formal presentation to the squadron this time. And in fact, one of the other reasons my squadron commander wanted my dad to come back was that previous summer when he first came, about half the squadron was deployed to Saudi Arabia, supporting Operation Southern Watch. This time in October, there'd be the entire squadron would be there to hear this. So a lot of the pilots were hearing this for the first time. So by this time, I actually wasn't in the squadron anymore. I'd been transferred to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, but I came down to videotape this presentation. So I'm the camera operator for the presentation you're about to see. So this is 1997. I was just using a little VHS compact recorder. There was no external mic, so the sound quality was not great. I've tweaked the sound quality to try to make it better. I've also added subtitles to this presentation when my dad starts to talk, to make it a little easier to understand what he's saying. I've also broken this video up into two parts because he spent the first part talking about the Korean War. The second part of his presentation was about the Vietnam War. So I'm making this part one. This presentation you're going to see focuses just on his Korean War experiences. I will put together a part two about his Vietnam experiences as a future publication. As some background, when my dad went over to Korea, he was initially assigned to the 154th Fighter Bomber Squadron, which was actually a National Guard outfit. In July of 1952, the 310th Fighter Bomber Squadron replaced the 154th. They just used the same planes. And then from that time on until February of 1953, my dad was assigned to the 310th Fighter Bomber Squadron. All right, so with that background context out of the way, let's go ahead and hear the presentation.
Discussion about when Joel's dad, Dr. Colonel Wright, came here this summer when we were all gone to the desert, and the tremendous stories and the aviation, the wealth of aviation knowledge and history, not only that he knows, but he's one of these guys that doesn't read about it, hasn't heard people talk about it. He's wrote it, lived it, been it. And I'm going to turn the floor over to him with very little ado here, but I want to just hit some of the highlights. And first of all, say that it's a tremendous honor and privilege for you to take the time away to come spend with the Bushmasters today, to have a chance to see your son, to be a part of a Bushmaster Heritage Day as we try to think a little bit about more than what we do every day, which is to take where we are currently in the Air Force and go forward, but to take a chance to turn around and reflect back on what got us here and the kinds of people that did things that keep us spilling less blood, that give us the airplanes we've got now, that give us the tactics that we have now, because like you're going to relay, it hasn't always been that way. A few quick highlights before Colonel Wright takes the stage and talks to you a little bit about some of his history in aviation, in the fighter and bomber business, and the Air Force in particular. Let me hit some of the things that boggle your mind first. 12,000 flying hours. Okay, so we can probably just about go up one side of this, and yeah, we might have a few more than that, but not many more than take one entire side of the stage and cut it off and go 12,000 flying hours. This one I'm pretty confident that if we put every airplane everybody in this room has flown together, we probably still don't equate to 26 different aircraft. Okay, 26 different aircraft he's been at the controls of, including that beautiful 47 Bonanza, if you've seen it out there. Over 45 years in the service of his country. 45 years. So starting out enlisted in the Texas Air Guard at 46 at age 15. Then to the Aviation Cadets in 50, commissioned in 51. Combat in Korea, flying the F-84, 100 missions of combat in Korea. Then flying all of the Century Series fighters, as you can imagine, through the 50s. And then unbelievably also transitioning from over fighters into when they were doing a lot of crossbow, especially when they were trying to get some new leadership into the bomber side, and that time SAC, over into bombers as well. He'll talk to you more about it, but obviously a lot of combat time, 140 missions in Vietnam, all in the Thud. So if you've read the book Thud Ridge or any of those stories going downtown Hanoi, no kidding, in the F-105. What an awesome airplane. And then to go from being a squadron commander in F-105s to a squadron commander in B-52s in the same year. Talk about a 180 out. I'm sure he's got some fascinating stories that he's going to share with us in that regard. Here's the one I think that most of us relate to and go, yeah, those really were the good old days. He never got a college degree or went to school until he was a colonel. And you gotta love that. And he's got some other fascinating stories, etc. But without more ado, and obviously I'm just reading off a piece of paper, it's time for you to come up and talk to us in living color about some of those. Sir, again, it's a privilege to have you with us. The floor is yours.
I was in 4 historic eras: the Korean police action in the war, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the USS Pueblo incident, and the Vietnam conflict. And when I finished aviation cadets, I was top of my class and let me pick whatever I wanted, and I picked the strike aircraft. They'd already had me assigned to F-86s, thinking I wanted to go there, and I didn't. I like strike. I like blowing up things. Just enjoy the heck out of it. History will tell us that always that we fly our last war, our next war was our last war of tactics, and we did that in Korea, we did that in Vietnam, and it cost us dearly. So you gotta come up with some new tactics and fight for new tactics and forget the old tactics that worked, 10, 15, 20 years ago. They won't work, I know. I'll start with Korea real quick, and then we'll jump around it. 1950 to 51, they just shoved in World War II pilots into the Korean War. My National Guard outfit was flying P-51s out of Texas, and 8 weeks later, the entire wing was in Korea flying F-84s. And they didn't know anything about jets. They absolutely didn't understand anything about jets. They didn't understand anything about compressibility or anything else. And that F-84 would get into a dive, and there was no way to bring it out. If it reached compressibility, that was it. You went in with the airplane. You could not get it out of the dive. Well, there was one way. You chop the power, put the speed brake out, and pull the trigger, and fire all 6 guns, and it slowed down enough that it would catch and come out of the dive. The tactics were strike anything in the open, because everything in 51 was moving the wrong way, and so it was all them, so they just struck anything in the open. And the bad part about that is sometimes the American people were in the open. I hit the 24th Infantry Division. I was a element leader at that time, and we dropped 36,000 pounds of bombs on the 24th Infantry. Fortunately, we didn't kill anybody. They upgraded the jets as fast as they could, and they upgraded in the field. A lot of them were over there in P-51s and took their upgrade right there in a F-84, and there was no such thing as a 2-seat F-84. They got in the thing, went out at the end of the runway, poured the coal to it, took off, flew for a while, and if you had another plane to chase you, fine, and brought it back in and landed. You usually made about 6 or 8 attempts to get to the runway before you could ever get it on the runway and stick it on the runway. I fortunately upgraded in the F-80. I went from the T-6 to the F-80, and my first ride in the F-80 was full tanks, take off, fly around for an hour, and then come in and try to find the runway. You overshot dozen times where you could line up and you landed, you went long a half a dozen times. About that time, the fuselage tank was almost empty, and then you had to land or bail out. We had a bailout area south of Williams, and if you didn't make it, you just went to the bailout area and jumped, and went and got another airplane to fly. And the way we learned to fly the F-80 really was, we just stuck one on a set of pylons, strapped it, and you got in the airplane, started up, ran it, act like you were flying, and pulled the gear up, put the gear down, and then after you did that a couple of times, when they went out, put you in a real F-80. Flight size, the combat size was varied. They tried the World War II tactics, and I'll show you up here. At 15,000 feet, the 58 fighter wing would go in at high wing. The 49th was next, the 474th was next. Those were all F-84s. Then the F-80s, and I forgot what wing F-80s were in. They were 80s were next, the Meteors were next, and the Rocks were flying P-51s. That amounted to about 200 or 300 airplanes. Above us, way up there, off the board, was the F-86s. They never came down where we were. They would not come down into the anti-aircraft fire. They helped us out. Coming the other way were the MiGs, and there would be between 200 and 300 MiGs. I've seen as many as 200 MiGs. I was told that one battle there's 300. And then coming towards us were the Corsairs, the A-1s, and the Panthers. And we all got to the target. There would be about 450 airplanes on the target. And the only thing you could do was avoid a mid-air collision. There was no coordination, no nothing. You just all arrived, and you would be going down on your bomb run, and you'd be meeting a Panther coming out of his bomb run. And we had no directions to bomb, no coordination, no nothing. It was wild. I was in one air battle where I saw a MiG and an F-86 coming down in pieces, and both parachutes coming down almost side by side. They must have had mid-air collision, because it was crazy. We were never allowed to drop our bombs. We had to go in and drop our bombs on the target. We never were allowed to jettison your bombs. So you just plowed straight ahead and let the MiGs chew you up. And if you dropped your bombs, you could get pulled. But we were fighter bombers, and our target was a target, and therefore, if you dumped your bombs and tried to fight with them, that wasn't what you were. You were a fighter bomber, but you were a fighter bomber. Little fighter, big bomber. Then after you dropped your bombs, you could go play with the MiG, but a straight wing 84 couldn't do anything with the MiG. Absolutely zero. So my tactic was to get as low as I could, like 50 feet off the ground, and fly as fast as I could, and hide behind my armor plate. And I had a MiG chasing me out of North Korea one day, just shooting at me like crazy. And I could see the ground blowing up in front of me, but he never got me. And then when he finally stopped firing, I thought he was gone, and I kind of stood up, I sat up, looked to my right. He was sitting in tight formation with me. He had a sleeve rolled up, he had a big white arm with red hair on his arm. Soviet pilot. We found out later, probably about the last 10 years, the Soviets did a lot of flying. Tactics were all World War II. The bombing was horrible. When I got there finally in '52, most of the National Guard pilots had left, and now purely trained pilots were purely jet trained pilots. So the things improved a little bit. The formations then were still, in '52 to '53, the formations were still big formations, but there were also big air battles where we had more coordination at that time. We had a lot more, our losses were pretty heavy. I wasn't shot all the way down. I recovered about 200 feet above the ground, and I had jettisoned my bombs. I was in a right-hand bank, and he hit me in the right drop tank, and it blew me upside down, and I was going down upside in a spin. And I jettisoned my bombs in the other drop tank and flipped into a normal spin and recovered from the spin, but my bombs armed, and I pulled out over my bombs, blew about 250 holes in the airplane, cut the rudder pedal, cut the rudder cables, blew the radio out, blew the canopy off, and fuel all streaming out of the airplane. And I turned around, went home, and they reported me as killed in action. We had a post-rack report, and all they saw was me spinning down and going up. So I went home and landed and took a shot of old Methuselah and went to bed. And when they came back, they reported me as killed in action, and finally when they discovered I was in bed, came to wish me hello by pouring whiskey in my eyes, and I thought someone had started, we had penetrated on the base, so I thought someone stuck 2 hot rods in my eyes, and I grabbed my .45 and started to try to kill somebody, and the guy that did that was later a 3-star general. The final tactics ended up with F-86s replacing the F-84s, F-86Fs, and the bad part about that, all of them wanted to be air superiority pilots, and they were stuck in the strike business. So they would literally go up, true story, most of them would go up, throw their bombs away so they could get up into the air battle. Well, we didn't do that because there was no way we wanted to get in the air battle. But the MiGs always came down, and they would drop down, they'd come over us, and they'd drop down behind us, and they'd shoot all the way through us and head home. And they usually hit 1 or 2 airplanes. And so when you got a whole just miles and miles and miles of fighters, and they're coming in from behind it, they could take out a few airplanes. And when that 37 hit, it really made a hole. I got some slides I'll show you. And hopefully it's going to be good. That's where we live in Korea. They were literally mud huts, but they were put together with frames, and then they were plastered over with mud. I think the interesting thing here is that the bathroom was non-heated, and you had just big holes to sit on and do your thing. And when you flushed, the Korean on the other end poured water in the tray, and it all went down to the other end. And he bought the stuff on the other end. They bid for that, so they could go and fertilize the crops. So whenever you need to flush, you just yell and he'd pour water in there. And this is the squadron of everybody up here. Everybody here, dead, 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 dead. You almost have the rest of it. Dead, 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 alive, dead, me, I'm dead. Dead, dead, alive, 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 and alive. That was the squadron. As you can well see, there were no standardized flying suits in those days. You wore whatever you could find. And the bad part about it is you flew with a blue flying suit, you bailed out, there were no blue trees to hide them. That's an 84 waiting to get armed. Bombs laying everywhere. There was no such thing as safety over there. That's an 84 with 2 500-pounders and 4 250-pounders. We couldn't take off, we couldn't carry more than 2,000 pounds, period. The airplane weighed 24,000 pounds and had 5,000 pounds of thrust. And it just simply took every bit of the runway we could find to get off. The cockpit of the 84 wasn't very complicated, very good. It did have a fantastic A1 gun sight, which I'll tell you about in a minute. The radar gun sight, we thought if it locked on something, obviously there was something ahead of you. So we made all of our letdowns with the radar gun sight on into the mountains, figuring that it would lock on the mountain, and then we could pull up. It doesn't work that way. That's not a bomb. That's the only rescue you can expect. It's a gas tank filled with corrugated cardboard, a Thompson submachine gun, a map, some blankets, and if you were shot down, we just flew over where you were, dropped it, and the thing would crush open, and you'd get your machine gun out, your maps, your blankets, and obey home. That was the scary. There was no chance of being zero. All takeoffs were formation. We had a 8,000-foot concrete runway that was built over quicksand, and half of it sunk into the quicksand. The neat part about this is the person I don't talk about that very much. It's called BYA Mountain right here. You see the two going over the hill. In the summertime, it truly was BYA bust your ass, because if you couldn't get enough altitude, you ran into the mountain. And the only way you could avoid the mountain is to take off and immediately, if you didn't think you were going to get altitude, immediately turn right and go down the river and fly down the river trying to get your airspeed and gain altitude. This is Daegu. This is where we flew off of the last half of the war. The first half of the war, we flew off of this PSP runway. And the trouble is, every time you hit the runway, a piece would pop up, and they had Koreans with sledgehammers. And they really went out there and beat the thing down before the next airplane landed. And so occasionally you would hit a Korean. BYA is right here. We take off and turn right, put on the river, gain our airspeed going down the river that way. The North Koreans actually penetrated right to there on the Busan Peninsula, Busan perimeter. They actually penetrated right there. There's a Soviet tank still, but at that time, sitting there with his gun aiming down the runway. And he was firing at airplanes as they were taking off. This is how we went to the target before we spread. Spread formation was line abreast. And when you cross front lines, you just line those canopies up as line abreast as you could, about a quarter mile apart. And that's the way we went. One of my ROTC students said, "What is that from line?" I said, "Those are bullet holes in the canopy." But that's the way we went up, and we're all carrying 1,000-pounders there. And then coming home, honestly, it was every man for himself. He ran like crazy. Fastest airplane was big. And some of them were very good. We always gave the slowest airplane to the FNG. And we were always had the fastest. That's why we flew. There's a Panther coming up on me one day. Come home with me because he couldn't get to his carrier. And they're carrying napalm there. And here is our field in the wintertime. Can't see it real well, except, there's one I'm bellying in right there. He had his gear shot out, and he's bellying in. That's why the firing is heading out there. He hit the snow beautifully, and they just picked him up and repaired you could just see him a little bit better. Pilot's out of the airplane now, he's over here. But we were all standing there watching him come in with his belly in. I was on mobile control the day that this guy was taking off and blew a tire and slid right up to mobile. Here's mobile. I saw him coming, the door's here, and I thought he was going to hit the door, so I opened the hatch up and jumped out the hatch. He stopped about 10 feet short of the hatch of the door. Still had his 750-pound bombs. Well, they weren't still on. They were torn off and rattled down the runway. I didn't do that. That's my 100th mission. That was my airplane. That was the first yellow rose in Texas. All my airplanes were yellow rose in Texas, Texas flag. The MiG tactics were real simple. They came in humongous stacked elements, like 20 or 25 of them. And they had a Soviet leader and all of the people stacked up. And he would just go in and show them what to do, and then they'd just start peeling off and coming down. And they came down in just long lines of MiGs. And everybody got one shot and went home. That was their tactics. You never mixed it up with MiGs. Now the 86s got up there and mixed it up, but the 86s wouldn't come down to protect us, so I'm not truly a big 86 lover. I like my cap to come down and help me. We called them one day and we said, "Get down here." And they said, well, they called it back and they said, "We're not coming down to where you guys are. You're suicidal." So,
all right, well, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I am going to put together a part 2, which focuses on his Vietnam experiences. So I hope to have that published soon. All right, thank you so much.